My name is Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. I'm a marine biologist and founder of Ocean Collectiv, a new consulting company for ocean conservation strategies that center social justice. I see a lot of my mentors in this room, so it's really an honor to be here. And hopefully we'll say something that's also inspiring for the next generation. It's wonderful to have so many youth with us. So I'll start by doing a quick introduction of our incredible panelists. And this panel is focused on how do we do ocean conservation in this new political reality. We're gonna pick their brains for lessons on how to make sure that we continue moving forward. So with that, I'll first introduce Ralph Nader. An author and attorney, presidential candidate, founder of advocacy and watchdog groups Public Interest Research Group, Center for Auto Safety, and the Public Citizen. I'm grateful to have him on the panel to bring his perspective as an activist and a campaigner. Next we have Don Racanelli, CEO of the National Aquarium. Their mission is to inspire conservation of the world's aquatic treasures. And I think it's really important not to lose that inspiration piece, which Sylvia always reminds us of. And most recently, I was reading about your favorite animal being the dolphin, and also that the National Aquarium recently decided just last year to end its exhibition of dolphins in part of its shift away from being and towards being a center for conservation. So we're seeing a lot of evolutions in what aquaria can do as well. Next we have Farah Obaidullah, founder and director of Women for Oceans. And they are focused on highlighting the incredible ocean conservation work of women around the world. Lots to highlight amongst the women in this room as a start. She previously was a senior ocean campaigner at Greenpeace and believes, after my own heart, that social injustice and environmental crimes are inherently linked. And we're happy to have her here and bring an international perspective to the panel. She's currently based in the Netherlands. And last but not least, we have Chad Nelsen, who's the CEO of Surfrider. Previously, for 16 years, he was their environmental director, and I'm always encouraged to see organizations promoting their premier experts from within. One of the campaigns that he led there was to save trestles, which prevented the construction of a multi-lane highway that would have ruined a world-class surf break. So there are some interesting lessons to be learned from that, and from his development of the concept of surfonomics, the economic value of surfing. So we'll start by having each panelist give Mr. Nader.
Thank you very much, Ayana. Thank David Halberg and his associates for convening us. David is a multiplier in the citizen movement, and he knows he can't do it all by himself. So he convenes and he leverages, and your presence here today is a testament to that. A lot of improvements have occurred in the past in the marine area, and obviously we're all pleased with the sanctuaries, large marine sanctuaries that have been established in a non-ideological way. The nice thing about mobilizing people on oceans is that the people who use the beaches and the oceans don't have labels on themselves. They are not ideological. And if you see the opposition to offshore drilling in South Carolina and elsewhere, you can see the emergence of an unstoppable political force, which is a left-right alliance. And that is unstoppable when it focuses on Congress. Left-right alliance reflects on-the-ground reality. Empirical realities dissipate ideological fantasies. And so when you go swimming with your family, you don't say, well, I don't want to regulate these beaches, because they're polluted, because I'm anti-regulation. That's what happens when you get down to where people live, work, raise their families, and play. You dissipate these ideological schisms, and don't think that members of Congress are unaware of that. When members of Congress see a left-right coalition or alliance, they turn pale. They don't know how to game it. They know how to game liberals by liberal members of Congress. They know how to game conservative. But when you walk into the office, locally or nationally, they don't know how to game it. And it's an unstoppable political force. Now here you have the greatest number of ingredients for left-right alliance, for consumer business environmental alliance. You have the example of restaurants that survive on ocean fish, for example, assuming you believe in eating fish. And you have the tourist industry. You have the fishing, recreational fishing. Trout Unlimited became a champion against water pollution on lakes and streams and rivers because they knew that if they didn't take a bigger picture beyond getting every trout they could grab when they went to these lakes, it would be over. And so they raised their perspective. So all these vested interests plus the civic interests can meld together because they know what's coming if we don't change the situation. The misuse of the ocean, the depletion of oxygen, the depletion of life in the oceans. And we have to expand the awareness. People are aware of whales, they're aware of dolphins, they're aware of sharks. Are they aware of krill? Are they aware of menhaden? The very depletion of those resources, especially around Antarctica. And that's why I ventured into fiction recently with a book called Animal Envy, which is a fable that allows animals through a software app to talk to human beings after all the millennials, years and everything, and they talk to human beings. And we have to give the denizens of the oceans animistic characteristics so they can talk from their own experience and their own necessities to human beings. That's a way to arouse the interest of kids, of children, for example, through a fable. And that'll be available at lunch if you want to look through it and get a copy. The other thing that's important is civic training on Congress. And I'll end with that because we're limited in time. All efforts should always ask the question, as your prior speaker did, who's the deciding institution? Or you have mass rallies, you have marches. That energy goes into the ether if it isn't directed laser beam on senators and representatives, or your state legislature, or whoever happens to be in the executive branch, federal and state. All efforts have to be focused on answering the question, who are people who are going to have to make decisions we want them to make? And so you want to judge your effectiveness by many standards, obviously, but one of them is that you have a relationship with your senators and representatives. They know you, you know them, you can summon them back to town meetings through formal summons. There are only 535 of them, and last I heard, they put their shoes on every day like you and I do. Thank you.
I just want to make it like a little bit cozier up here. Poor Chad is like way out to the side. Let's be one group. Yeah? Come on in. All right. So John, please give us your aquarium education outreach perspective on this scenario.
Thank you. Well, I heard Ralph just say he's ventured into fiction. I read about now, I think we've all ventured into fiction. And we're in the center for those fictions right now, our capital. Well, I thought about this question of how are we going to, address these next few years, and I decided that we all need to go on a rant. Resist, advocate, numbers, and truth. By resistance, I mean we need to stand up for science. We need to stand up for evidence-backed science and make sure that we don't let people who choose not to believe in science somehow capture the agenda. I think this is going to happen more through states and cities as opposed through the federal government for the next several years. Let's hope not too many, but at least 2, maybe 4. God forbid more than that. And I think one indication of standing up and resisting has been in the fact that the budget has been approved, the continuing resolution to carry through the 2017 budget, and actually NOAA got a 2% increase, and the Institute for Museum and Library Services got funded, and the NEH and the NEA, and a lot of really important efforts. Now the EPA, which I posted yesterday that I think we've somehow lost the P in that name, but the EPA is in trouble. But I think this 2017 budget is a good precursor to what's going to happen in 2017, and we need to fight for that, and remember that that fight is always being fought. On advocacy, well, that's where we come in, I think all of us in this room, and there is a burgeoning effort by my peers in the community of aquariums to become stronger advocates alongside our friends in the NGO community. And I think it's important for us to identify what's truly at stake here. We have to be the ones that tell people, that help them understand these issues, but do so in a way that does not threaten them and does not scare them into inaction, as we heard Sylvia talking about. I think we have some pretty unlikely bedfellows in this effort when we get back to the federal stage. General Dynamics makes its money off satellites, and guess who's at risk of losing a lot of their funding under the Trump administration with respect to our weather, the National Weather Service. So we can make a friend out of an entity that we might have once thought of as being a little less than environmentally engaged. Insurance companies, as it relates to sea level rise, they've got a strong incentive to reduce claims, and one way is frankly to create more resilient shorelines and not focus our money on seawalls and trying to hold back the sea. Let's talk about numbers for a minute. I think these regional partnerships that we're starting to form are going to make a lot of difference. I'll talk later. I think we have a chance about the Aquarium Conservation Partnership that we've co-founded with the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We have the opportunity here, as a certain artist once said, they've got the guns, but we've got the numbers. And we need to share our strength together. That means we need not to compete with each other in the conservation community. We need to be focusing on working together on these efforts, affiliating and uncomplicating the issues. We talk at the National Aquarium about global warming, atmospheric temperature increase as a heat trapping blanket. And we do that with our hands to help people understand what we mean by heat trapping blanket. We need to make these issues understandable because, as some have said and others will say throughout these next 2 days, they are hard to put into terms that the average American understands. And finally, truth to power. We need to share our successes. We need to amplify each other's efforts. This is not a time for silos and competition. This is a time for us to work together in a consolidated way, as we just heard Mr. Nader say, to work against the efforts that would hold us back. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Ayana said, I've been working in ocean conservation for a long time. I won't go into why the healthy oceans are important. We all know that. We also know what the problems are that they're facing. And so what we also know is that we need solutions fast. And in all my time in working in ocean conservation, mostly in academia and then also with the big NGOs, we're working with scientists and policymakers and government officials. The message has always been on point. We know what we need to do. We know that we need to create marine reserves and reduce our fishing capacity. We know that we need to improve and enforce the existing instruments that we have around port state measures, around transparency and traceability in the seafood industry, etc. So I believe we have those solutions. Yes, we can improve on them. But one thing that I think is missing is embracing the diversity in approaches that we need to secure healthy oceans. And that means recognizing diversity in the people and reaching people everywhere. And I heard Sylvia Earle touch on this, and Daniela touch on this as well. It's about reaching people everywhere and recognizing that diversity. And unfortunately, until now, the discussion around ocean conservation has largely been shaped by a few people. We're over 7 billion people on this planet, and if we're going to reach all of them, we need to be looking at the fact that there isn't one message that's going to reach everyone, and there isn't one messenger that's going to reach everyone. We need to be creating role models across the world, across geographies, across ethnicities. We need to inspire women, girls, children in places across the world, in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, not just here in the US or in where I come from, in the Netherlands and in Northern Europe. If we're truly going to make a difference, we have to reach people everywhere. And so I grew up with mostly male role models, great role models, and I was supported by wonderful parents and lived in quite a privileged sort of environment in the Netherlands. And so I was able to pursue my dreams, but now what I realized looking around the world and in all my travels around coastal communities in South America and Africa and Southeast Asia, what I feel is missing is really those role models for young girls to be able to look up to and say, hey, I want to make a difference. And I studied biology and marine technology and worked with Greenpeace for 11 years nearly, and had all the resources available to me. But my message to everyone out there is that you don't need to be a marine biologist. You don't need to be working for an organization like Greenpeace or one of the many organizations represented here today. You can come from any background and still make a difference for our ocean. And that's really what Women for Oceans is about. It's about recognizing the individual rather than branding the organization. Because like I said at the start, it's about recognizing the many different approaches that is going to get us to the same goal of a healthy ocean for all of us. And I'd be happy to talk later about some of the challenges, the international challenges that I see or have observed under the current administration, or some of the sort of anxieties that exist around some of the policies. I suppose we'll have time for that in a bit. But yeah, thank you.
So first of all, it's really great to be here. There's a lot of ocean conferences. You can go to one probably every week, and you can learn a lot and you can network. But this is one of the only conferences that's activist-oriented and grassroots activist-oriented, and in fact builds that into the conference. So kudos to David and everyone else who's organized this conference and everyone who's here, because if there was ever a time for activism, it's now. And so this conference has probably never been more important in its history than it is this year. So, and I think that's an exciting thing to see all these people ready to take action. And so some of the reasons I'm optimistic about our ocean future, sort of as Sylvia talked about, is we are more popular than the opposition. Our policies and our interests, not only are there more of us, but our policies are popular, and the policies that are being put forward are unpopular. So we've got numbers on our side, and we need to figure out how to tap into that. France just had an election this week, made a good choice, thankfully. They had the lowest turnout in their history. It was still better than our best turnout in our history, in our country. So we have a lot to do to get all those people to vote. But that leads us to sort of the marches. The marches may not be direct action, but they symbolize the power and the interest in our movement. So I think the second point is there's momentum, which we've never seen before, at least in my time. People are more interested in getting active than we've ever seen. So there's so much potential to get people active. And not only are they out on those marches, they're going to the town hall meetings. So if you've been following the Indivisible movement, another amazing mobilization around issues. And most of that's around healthcare, and I think there's a lot we can learn from that. The other thing this administration is trying to do is they're trying to take things from us that we feel like are our rights. whether that's clean air, clean water, a healthy ocean, and a healthy planet. And that's a strong emotion that I think we can really tap into the same way people are saying, hey, don't take away my healthcare. So let's learn from that movement and figure out how we can use that to our advantage. The other thing is there's these amazing tools out there now. We've watched this emergence of the invisible movements, swing left, call 5. There's all these different ways people can get engaged. And so we have the power of the internet to help mobilize people in ways that we just haven't ever seen before. And those tools are at our disposal too. So we can use them for the ocean movement the same way they're being used for other movements. I think last is we should remember that this is a sprint and a marathon. It's been 100 and X number of days, and there's bad news happening every day, and it's easy to get overwhelmed by that. But a lot of these executive orders, if they're not fake, which some were fake last week, are actually just press releases on steroids. Oil drilling is a perfect example. Did Trump open up drilling? No, he instigated a process, and that's where the marathon comes to play. There's going to be hearings, there's going to be process, there's going to be comment periods. So there's so much room for us to get mobilized. So we have to remember that, it's not just the first 100 days, it's the next 2 years and the next 4 years, and we have a ton of opportunity to go out there and make a difference. And I think we're seeing evidence like the budget and other things where these congressmen are going to quickly realize their constituents are unhappy. And then, the other last piece is, as Tip O'Neill is credited with saying, all politics is local. And we have a tremendous opportunity to get involved locally. As Ralph pointed out, ideology gives way to pragmatism at the local level. So regardless of your feelings about oil drilling, if you run a hotel on the coast of South Carolina, that drilling has no advantage for you, regardless of your politics. And we saw that with the offshore drilling opposition movement last year with those 120 resolutions along the Atlantic coast. It shows that you can make a huge difference at the local level, and that will boil up to the top. So we can use all these levels of government to our advantage. And so, grassroots mobilization has never been sort of more opportune, and we have an opportunity to make a huge impact at that level. So I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to, keep a lot of the things that we were created over the last 8 years and defend them. And here's to having a really successful Blue Vision conference to do that.
So after listening to these opening remarks, can we have another hour for this panel? We've got a lot of amazing stuff to talk about. And I think your point, Chad, about this being both a marathon and a sprint is a really keen one. And actually, I've spent the last few months making sure to take care of my health, knowing that I'm both sprinting and marathoning at the same time. I'm doing a lot of yoga. So I guess along those lines, I'd love to hear from each of you sort of what is your marathon and what is your sprint? If you were going to pick like one issue that we all need to be focused on right now versus like what is the thing we really over the next few years cannot let erode?
First of all, we need a report on how soon Mar-a-Lago is going to be underwater. That'll get us attention. And second, we need more measurements of progress or regress in terms of, there was an environmental group years ago, I don't know if they still do it, but they rated beaches during the summer. Do they still do that? Yeah, that's very important to see which beaches are more polluted than others, and people resonate to that, obviously. They don't want to bring their children to polluted beaches and go to other places that are less polluted, but we need more measurements in terms of when things are getting worse, when things are getting better. And third, we need to raise our expectations beyond the ocean, because if we don't network with other movements, not just diversity movements, and I'll give you an example. How many of you have thought this morning about this question. Why aren't 1 million people watching this proceeding? Or 2 million people around the country over C-SPAN or over the networks? Have you looked at the TV Guide lately and see how your property is being destroyed and misused and abused? We own the public airways. We're the landlords. The radio and TV stations are the tenants. We give it to them free 24 hours a day, and they decide who says what and who doesn't, who gets on and who doesn't. So if we don't raise our expectation in a broader sense, we will not accelerate what we're trying to pursue. C-SPAN is supposed to be covering Congress, but also the civic society. And instead, it has reruns during the primary last year of Ted Cruz's bilge 3 times, sometimes in one day. It's just constant fillers, constant fillers. And you got to put pressure on C-SPAN to say, look, get a few more cameras and go around and give voice to people who represent majority opinion in this country. And less than 1% on any major social justice movement, 1% or less of the citizenry organized with each other can turn around almost any power force in the country. That has been shown again and again and again. Whether it's, you take any social justice movement in the country and ask, is there more than 1% of these people spending a few hundred hours a year connected with one another? And the answer is, outside of the wars, there's never more than 1%. We regulated the auto industry with far less than 1% around the country. If you get 1% on any major issue and you reflect public opinion, that's the key nexus. You have knowledge, you have 1% or less organized, you reflect public opinion, you win. And if you do a left-right alliance, you win even faster. So on the shores of our country, you get 1% or less of the people committed to an ocean civic hobby, call it that, people like hobbies, which are about 300 to 400 or 500 hours volunteer a year in terms of advocacy, mobilization, education. You win. It's important to have these kinds of yardsticks because people can get discouraged too quickly. They can get depressed, demoralized. Never has it taken, even the civil rights movement did not take more than 1% of people over time committed. See, that's got to sink in. I discovered the 1% a few years ago, and I find that really communicates to people, because otherwise they feel overwhelmed and they got to get huge numbers of people. No, if you reflect majority opinion, there's a lot of left-right consensus in this country. You reflect majority opinion, less than 1% will get it done.
Thank you for that, Ralph. And I want to add to that. You asked about one thing, Ayana, and I think, I several years ago, before I re-entered the fish tank, I was working for Sylvia, and when you gave your TED Talk, Sylvia, in 2008, I think that was really the first opportunity to really spread the idea of hope. And I took that with me to the National Aquarium when I joined that organization in 2011, and we have set out as our kind of call to action to inspire a generation of hope-filled conservationists. People who come to it because they believe that there is hope to do what we need to do. And what we spend a lot of our time doing is connecting, protecting, and sharing all the things that we think those young, mostly often young, but not only young people, need in order to sustain that sense of hopefulness. And we said hope-filled because hopefulness also has a connotation of sort of hope, wistful sense of hopeful, but maybe not. This is filled with hope, and we think we are beginning to have an impact in the people that we're talking to. And there's an interesting time right now for zoos and aquariums because they have traditionally been these places where animals were gathered and people came and saw them, and that model has been deeply questioned. But the concept of and the need for a higher level of awareness of the inner lives and the welfare of animals really underpins a true conservation ethic. In fact, there are new concepts out now such as compassionate conservation, which basically says no act of conservation should, while helping the mass of populations that are affected, somehow impact negatively the individuals. And that's an important consideration. Or humane education. The role of zoos and aquariums is evolving now towards providing an education for people, not only about the habitats and the places that we speak of, but also the humane sense of what we need to do to try to relate to animals. 85% of Americans are now living in cities or close-in suburban areas. That means that conservation has to move to an urban context as well. And so my team at the National Aquarium is focused completely on trying to create an urban conservation ethic, which is almost an oxymoronic idea, except it's not, because that's where we live, and we have to be able to inspire in people that conservation ethic in the urban setting. And sometimes that means by coming to places like the aquarium or parks or other places where people can have that small impact of nature that I think many of the people in this room, and as you said, Farah, all of us have had the sort of good fortune to have been able to have. So, you mentioned upping our standards, and that reminded me that another presidential candidate, Pat Paulson, once said, "I'm upping my standards, so up yours." I think we need to take that down to the current administration and show them just what we mean by that.
Wow, so one thing for the marathon.
I need a microphone. Do we have another microphone? Okay. So I can interrupt these people. So, John, I didn't totally catch, what's your marathon and what's your sprint?
I'm a swimmer, so I do sprints, and I really don't do marathons. If you've ever tried to swim 26 miles, it's very challenging. Our marathon is awareness and hope. We think that through a higher level of appreciation for what makes up the world ocean and how closely it's linked with us, that people can start to influence their decisions. I think our sprint is to keep fighting the ground fight, which means making sure that the people that are currently here in this city are not able to dismantle the government and take apart, for example, the intellectual capital that's been built up over many years in agencies like NOAA and the Fish and Wildlife Service.
So how exactly does the aquarium engage in that political activism lobbying?
We Aquaria are allowed to lobby, all organizations are, I think many of you know that, up to a certain amount of our spending. And we do. We have a registered lobbyist here in Washington and also at the state level. And we do.
That's great. Did anyone else know that the aquarium had a lobbyist? That's fantastic.
We're partnered up with HSUS, Humane Society of the United States, on a bunch of things. We became affiliates a couple of years ago of the National Wildlife Federation. We're the Maryland affiliate. Now that's sort of always been thought of as they call themselves the hooks and bullets people. But they did start there, kind of the same way Ducks Unlimited and others have.
That's that left-right unbreakable coalition.
There you go, exactly right. And we found that by affiliating with 49 other entities that are part of the National Wildlife Federation, we had a much greater potential for a broader impact. And we kind of brought the ocean into it.
Perfect. Farah, your marathon and your sprint.
Right, well, I am a runner, so yeah, but I don't run marathons. But if I'm thinking about what my marathon is, it's really about increasing the engagement of women around the world in the discourse around ocean management and conservation. Not just at the international level. I've seen that a lot over the years, that even where you have mostly sort of panels where it's mostly men, and even where there are women, the conversation or the dynamic of that conversation is going to be dominated or shaped by the dominant demographic, right? So it's really...
You guys are all on notice.
Yeah. No, I mean, look,
All my bosses are women.
right. Look, I've worked with lots of, wonderful men around the world, but I've also seen that when you have one dominant demographic, it's really hard for the other people to come in and have their voice heard. The same would be true if you had a room full of women and you ask a man to come in, and it's awkward, so it isn't just about sort of equality for the sake of, being fair to women alone. No, it's really about sort of harnessing our full potential as a species, and we haven't been doing that for generations, forever actually. Now we're slowly in some parts of the world seeing more women come in, and I know from my experience in ocean conservation, there are a lot more women that I've worked with than men. But when I go to international conferences, it's usually the men that dominate those conversations, not because they don't let women talk, or not because women have nothing to say, but because the space isn't there for women's voices to be heard. And so my marathon is to change that at the international level, but also at the community level. So what I was saying earlier about creating role models across the world, so that women everywhere don't feel sort of out of place. I was going to say afraid, but that's not true. I know many women that aren't afraid. But to really not feel out of place, to engage in conversations, to sit at the table, to bring their unique perspectives to the table, so that we can really try something different, because that's what we need. And this isn't unique to the ocean. This is across all sectors. And in the US in particular, we've seen with this administration a lot of resistance and the women's marches, and that's echoing around the world as well. But I think that's testimony that we are at the cusp of a revolution where we know we need to do things differently if we're going to change the course of our civilization. So that, I would say that's my...
I would echo that, because the largest mistake I ever made in doing ocean conservation was not to engage women. I fell into this same trap working with Caribbean fishing communities, where I just wanted to basically placate fishermen and make sure they weren't angry and that they were all building consensus amongst the fishing community, and not thinking, okay, well, who are you not talking to? Which is a huge mistake on many levels, but primarily because women, social science tells us, tend to think longer term, tend to think about the future for their children in a very different way, whereas men evolutionarily are worried about providing for the moment. And so if you leave out the people who are thinking about the future more, that's not a great recipe for good conservation. So just wanted to add that anecdote there.
Right.
And your sprint.
Yeah, so my sprint, there's so many sprints, especially, I'm just coming back to the Trump administration, because, that this is a largely US audience. Making sure that he doesn't deregulate, because I think that's one of his things, right, deregulation, but that also has consequences beyond the US, so making sure that that doesn't happen, so that the impacts aren't felt for, small-scale fishermen in Southeast Asia, for example, that, export to the United States, or making sure that that is Trump's idea of increasing import taxes doesn't affect small and medium-sized enterprises in other parts of the world that rely on exporting to the USA. So I guess the sprint is damage control under this administration. Also, you know that the US has taken, led the charge in sort of securing protected areas under regional fisheries management organizations. So international waters, making sure they get protected, like the Ross Sea last year. And so making sure that that leadership isn't eroded. And if, and I'm not American, but if this administration isn't going to lead that charge in the next 4 years, then making sure we find other international champions, other countries that do lead that charge. So,
great. So Chad, I was reading your bio and interview on the Surfrider website recently, and you mentioned that one of your priorities was to be more proactive. And I know that gets a lot harder given how much there is to react to. So when you talk about your Surfriders marathon and sprint, I'd love to hear more about also that balance between being proactive and reactive.
If you have a purely reactive strategy and you're just only trying to stop bad things from happening, you're gonna fail, because every victory at stopping something bad from happening is temporary, where every loss is permanent. So if we don't start getting out there, and Senator Menendez talked about that this morning, going on the offensive even in this congressional time, where he's promoting a permanent drilling ban and things like that. So if we're just playing defense, I think it's a failing strategy in the long term. So we have to get out there and try to promote proactive policies or in place, even in these sort of dark times. Our sprint is stopping new offshore drilling, something we already did last year, and we're going to do it again. And it's great to see all the groundwork that was laid last year is playing out in the media over the last week. There's already this red-blue sort of dynamic taking place along the Atlantic coast. So that's what Surfriders really are. Sprint is. Our marathon is to build an indomitable blue grassroots movement. We want to be the NRA of the ocean. So next time they're sitting around, as terrible as those guys are, like I want the congressman sitting around in their studies saying, "Hey, let's open up the coast for offshore drilling." Oh no, we can't do it. Let's not even try.
Surfrider will come after you. Don't do it.
All of us. And so I think that's our long-term goal. And the oceans have never been more popular. There's never been more awareness. Sylvia talked about that. So we have the opportunity to bring that and make it so big and so large and so politically powerful that people run scared when they try to mess up our coast.
That's awesome. So I have a lot of questions for you, but I want to open it up to the audience in a minute. So I had this list of policies that I wanted to ask you questions about, but I guess instead of asking you about each of them, I'll ask you if you had to pick one to save, which one would it be? All right. Would you rather, who knew this was going to become a drinking game? Would you rather save
B.
the National Ocean Policy, the Antiquities Act? Is that the one where the national monuments come under? No. The Antiquities Act, or, this is kind of cheating because it's part of the National Ocean Policy, marine spatial planning.
Yes.
Antiquities Act.
And why?
I mean, obviously there's an incredibly long tradition of presidents being able to designate these areas. I don't know if you know this, but half of our national parks started as monuments. And so without the Antiquities Act, without monuments, there are no parks. Obama created the largest protected area on the planet using the Antiquities Act. So the fact that the act itself is threatened is horrifying. And I'm pretty convinced that again, our parks are incredibly popular. These conservation areas are popular, and I find it really hard to imagine that act can go away. But I think for today and tomorrow, we can rebuild the National Ocean Policy. We can rebuild regional plans. Let's not lose like one of the strongest sort of political conservation opportunities that we have in our country.
I will only allow other people to answer if you disagree. Or is that a consensus opinion?
How can you disagree?
Okay. So my last question, and this is something that several people have brought up, is thinking about ocean conservation as a movement that needs to be more inclusive, representative of communities, of all the different demographics who are working on the issue, of women, of people of color, of poor people, of youth. And I think about that a lot also in the context of what John was saying about urban conservation. The two things that I've been thinking about right now are urban ocean conservation and what I've been calling ocean justice, this intersection of ocean conservation and social justice. So I'd love to hear from you where you think the power lies in leveraging those intersections in pushing for a more diverse and inclusive ocean conservation movement. What are you either doing in that area or want to do or see as a really powerful opportunity to bring diversity to political wins?
Well, I'll start. Our emphasis on urban conservation is not just a label. We've actually, on the plus side, we've actually touched the lives of 15 million students in the 35 years the aquarium's been there. So our first impact is that we just have these kids coming through the place in vast numbers, and And it is something that I'm not only proud of, but I feel like it's a huge opportunity. And when you add up all of the places like us, the ones that are really moving in this direction, and there are at least a dozen kind of major aquariums that are trying to, I feel like we've got this this bully pulpit, this this tool that we want you all to use to help get this messaging to everybody, but especially to young people. And most aquaria, like my own, are in urban areas, and so our focus is on our community. So in Baltimore, which is 66% African American, we are starting to evolve our internship program and our education programs to try to make sure that it is fully reflective of the racial and ethnic diversity of our community. And we've found that that's something that's very attractive to funders and donors and sponsors, because they want to help make that kind of transition happen too. I think in terms of what we're trying to convey, it is to make the ocean relevant. It's just as simple as that, is to get people to recognize that the ocean actually means something in their lives. Even if they're living in a completely urban setting in the middle of the country, the ocean is relevant to them. And so that's been a big part of the messaging we're trying to do through our programs for youth, through our actual public and informal learning programs, and through our outreach into communities throughout our region and the nation where we feel that they're not getting that kind of contact yet.
Well, sorry. When I was in elementary school, the only thing we studied about oceans were their names. A little bit more on forests. And so what's in the schools? Now, there's a GIS day for high schools, for example, in the fall, that's integrated by this company out in Redlands, California, ESRI, E-S-R-I-I, and they provide a lot of guidance and material. But if you do Geographic Information System Day, you can focus on the ocean, you can focus on dead zones, for example. There are all kinds of data sets, as they say, that produce maps. And so that's one way to get the visual attention of students. The second is, it is amazing how many people show up at aquariums. I don't think people have any idea how aquariums, I mean, the one in Connecticut is like, it's the biggest visitation of all the other museums combined. So why? You know one reason why? Octopi.
My favorite animals!
Octopi, the most fascinating, least known live organism in the animal kingdom. What it can teach scientists, what it can teach for metaphors, what it can teach for adaptability, fascinating. You know what the image of the octopus was when I was growing up? Tentacles, evil, that was the image. So we got an educational challenge. The second thing for inclusiveness, I want to have inclusiveness embrace Congress and the state legislature. And one way to do it, make them come and talk to your gatherings. When politicians have to talk to certain audiences, they can't talk to your audience and praise Trump, for example. They have to have prepared remarks that deal with oceans. And that means their staff prepares the remarks. That means they're committed to certain phrases, words, sentences, you see? And the NRA knows this, and AIPAC knows this. AIPAC draws like 300 members of Congress. Do you ever see a mass demonstration by the NRA? Do you ever see a mass demonstration or march by AIPAC? They don't fool around with that stuff. They focus on face-to-face, in personam lobbying on every senator and representative. They know who they are, who their staff is, what kind of vacations they take, who their lawyer is back home, who their doctor is, who their accountant is, what clubs they belong to. They have dossiers on these people because they know that's who's going to make the decision. So inclusiveness has to include the formal decision makers at the national, state, and local level. And the other way you do it is you invite them to join your clubs and your association. You have an estuary association, you have something in the Gulf or something in Florida, ask them to be honorary members, ask them to join. Pretty soon, you're running downhill, you're not running uphill. Very few members of Congress want to be known as running against the oceans, right? So that's the way, you have to have vertical inclusiveness as well as horizontal
That's a great point, thank you.
Empowerment. You know, the idea that you're not alone. I think that's very important. And again, I'm taking this, you know, beyond the U.S. But you know, in my experience over the past year, as I've been sort of setting up Women for Oceans, you know, talking to many incredible women, often they are alone, right? So, or they think they are alone in their efforts to engage their local, you know, their municipalities or their politicians. But then they're actually not alone, but they don't know that. So really it's about connecting people. And, you know, what better metaphor, the ocean does that, right? The ocean connects us all. But even within communities and countries and regions, you know, connecting people by their passion, their concerns, so that they do feel empowered and they can take that step and go to their politicians or go to their, you know, community sort of leaders and speak out on what is important to do, whether that's, you know, reducing fishing or cleaning up the beaches or whatever it is that's going to get us, you know, moving in the right direction. So I think that's my my number one sort of
Empowering and connecting.
Empowering and connecting, yes.
So a few of the panelists have mentioned marching, and it's good to engage people, get them out, connect them, make them feel empowered, and then hopefully the goal is to leverage that for more of this vertical inclusion of politicians and decision makers in these conversations. So I just want to throw in my 2 cents that, caveat, I was one of the co-organizers for the March for Science, so clearly I'm pro-marching. And I'm also helping organize an ocean march June 4th, right before the UN conference. If anyone wants to ride a boat around Lower Manhattan to celebrate the ocean, it'll be really fun. But I think the beautiful thing about this panel is how you all really are focused on the grassroots and engagement. So Surfrider, certainly not the least among those. So I'd love to hear what you guys are doing to leverage diversity and inclusion for your goals.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think the ocean conservation movement broadly has a lot of work to do to be more inclusive and diverse. And certainly we at Surfrider have that same challenge. So, but if we look at the, you know, the sort of older people in the ocean conservation movement, there's not a lot of diversity at all. If you look at the youth, it's really diverse. It's a reflection of the demographics of our country, but that wouldn't explain it all. And I think that, you know, there's a huge movement to get kids outside, especially in urban areas. In a lot of places, beaches are one of the biggest. In Los Angeles County, for example, beaches are the largest public open space in LA County. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity to engage people and get more people out to our coastlines.
And yet kids from Compton often have never gone to the beach.
Never been. So we've been teaming up with a lot of youth outdoor groups, Latino Outdoors, these groups, and say, hey, how about a beach day? Well, what kid doesn't want to come to the beach? And like you're saying, I mean, a lot of them live within walking distance to beaches and they've never felt welcome. So for us, engaging youth, engaging youth outdoor programs, connecting those communities to the beaches, which are often very close to them, is one way to sort of build that diversity from the bottom up.
That's great.
Can I add one thing real quickly? There was a large study done on American attitudes towards oceans in general and conservation specifically. And one of the things it revealed that was really fascinating was that immigrant Americans are twice as likely as native-born Americans to care about protecting wild places, which was just a fascinating revelation. And it's particularly strong in the Latino community.
Send all of the immigrants to us. Help us save our ocean.
The conservation-minded masses.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we have time for 2 questions. You are very keen.
Okay, so you got 1% of the population reflecting public opinion with left right alliances, right? So how do we all leave this conference with more than just cerebral knowledge of that? How do we build that movement? What are the strategies, the tools to do that?
Show up, join up, get involved with others that are already doing these things. I think we don't need to keep starting new movements. I mean, David's been, pounding away at the seaweed nation here for quite some time, and I think we all really do need to, affiliate and strengthen and show the strength in numbers that we actually have. We could call it cephalopods for something.
And hold those in power to account. Not just those in power, but everybody around you. I think people have said it earlier, but like if you go to a restaurant, demand that that you don't get given a straw, or ask where the seafood comes from. If you're going to order fish, make sure it's sustainable, make sure it's local, and really put that pressure back on on the restaurant or the supermarket. So just get active in these small ways. We've heard that on the climate change issue, turn off the lights. We've heard it on, water preservation, turn off your tap when you're brushing your teeth. But the same goes for the ocean, those small things. Make sure you know where your seafood comes from. Make sure you throw away, and recycle your plastic. Make sure you actually try to reduce your plastic. And it's in those small things.
Notice when you read local newspapers, it's amazing how many social clubs there are that show up. And they're cut, they're just not just the Grange, there are all kinds of slices of society that form into clubs. So use the word clubs. And then when you get new people coming in, go out on recreational experiences with the ocean. And you socialize that way. And they go and they have fun, and then you realize that some of that fun may not last very long in terms of the degradation of the ocean. The other approach is the aesthetic approach, beauty. The difference between the consumer movement and environmental movement, tools of advocacy, the environmental movement has aesthetics. The consumer movement has never been able to have aesthetics. The beauty of the mountains, the beauty of the oceans, the sunsets, the birds, the wildlife. And that's another appeal. So
It shouldn't be a hard sell.
Pardon?
It shouldn't be a hard sell.
No, it shouldn't. These are easy entry. You want to get easy entry for people who think if you start right away with oceanics and the detail, it's a bit heavy. You start with the easy entry, and when they see how much they enjoy the natural surroundings, it may be taken away from them, or they have to go away from it because it's too polluted and find some other place, or the beach access is run into obstacles by easements and private property and so on. That's the way you get them going. The other is hand out $2 bills. You know why? Have you ever seen the side of the $2 bill? It shows the founding fathers that came together July 4th, 1776 to sign the Declaration of Independence, which they thought was signing their death sentence with King George III. I know they're all white males and some were slave owners, but the point is, aren't we glad they showed up? Okay, so, well, it's time for us to show up. And so some people start the $2 club, which is basically showing up as half of democracy. Once you get them there, you can really persuade them, right? But it's more difficult just getting them there than the rest of the process. And so the $2 club is another gimmick. Democracy is not immune to gimmicks.
Well, as Farah said earlier too about straws and stuff.
Hold on. We need to hear from you on this one.
Join Surfrider.
Join Surfrider.
In all seriousness, there's no shortage of volunteers. There's just shortage of volunteer opportunities. And so, they say don't get mad, get organized. And so it's as simple as forming the club in your town if there isn't one, finding the one that exists and getting involved, and you'll find that there's an incredible community that's making a difference. And I think, even on these federal issues, you can make a difference in your hometown. You can write a letter to the editor, you can go to a city council meeting and pass a resolution, and those little things will bubble up to get us the national movement we need.
Great. And John, do you have a last remark?
Just wanted to say walk the talk. I run a business too. The Aquarium's a business, and we consume. And so we have eliminated all single-use plastics, and we... It wasn't hard, it wasn't that hard. We kind of beat Pepsi over the head, and they, you know, took out all those 20-ounce plastic bottles, and they came back with all these cool bottles that are like 11 ounces, which is a more rational size serving anyway, and they're historic, and they had cream soda and root beer and all this other cool stuff. But also, you know, we've done that with our energy procurement policy. We now have 66% of our energy coming from solar. You know, it wasn't that hard, and now we're starting to see some businesses in our region pick up on what we did because they realized, oh, this makes us look good. So I think we have to walk our talk and cause the organizations that we belong to or that we're employed by to do the same.
You brought the straws to the bar last night. I'm serious, there were paper straws from our at the bar. It's awesome. Somebody.
Bravo.
Yeah.
So there's,
Stand up, straw person.
I've been told I'm really, really sorry, but I've been told we have to wrap it up. We've gotten a lot of really valuable insights from our 4 panelists. We all know we have our marching orders now. The last thing I would say, since there are a lot of youth in the room, is to echo what a lot of you said, is make it pretty too, and bring whatever skills you do have to the table. Art can be part of ocean conservation, law is part of ocean conservation, surfing is part of ocean conservation, chemistry is part of ocean conservation. We need spokespeople, so be a celebrity and be part of ocean conservation, be a basketball player or a rapper and be part of ocean conservation. So thank you to this panel representing the diversity of grassroots efforts for ocean conservation. And let's be sure to share their wisdom and inspiration when we all leave. Thank you.